You're listening to Well Met,
a
Hearthstone podcast brought to you by BlizzPro.com.
Well met.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 62 of Well Met. We are a Hearthstone podcast brought to you by BlizzPro.com. I am John Horstman, centered out of Denver, Colorado. And with me, of course, is from Saskatoon, Canada, Kevin Obdestad. Hey, Kev.
How's it going, John? Good to be back. It's been a crazy week. Lots of stuff going on personally, but also in the Hearthstone scene. So we've got a very jam-packed show as far as the amount of stuff we really need to cover tonight, hey?
We definitely do. Also on the show, from Saskatoon, Canada, it is Kevin Obdestad. Hey, Kev.
Good to be here, John.
Great. So JR is gone. He actually ditched out to go to the Overwatch event without telling any of us, saying that we could go. So not that we don't absolutely love being here, because we do. We absolutely love being here every week, but man, I really wanted to be at that event. Oh well, we're here. It'll be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. I mean, I don't know that I would have missed out on doing this to be there either way. Kudos to JR for going, and I mean, I'm sure he's gonna want to report on it, talk all about it over on BlizzPro. So it'll be interesting. There'll be lots of stuff that he can bring back from it. But I, for one, am more excited to talk about Hearthstone.
Word. All right. Well, let's talk about Hearthstone then. How was your week in Hearthstone? I know you've been pretty busy jumping back and forth and, pond hopping across, not really pond hopping, just coming down here to the States for a little bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I didn't get to play a lot, and the time I did spend playing, I was messing around, trying some new decks, settled on maybe going to spend the last week of the month ranking up using Cthulhu Warrior is sort of where my head's at right now, but I was busy. Yeah, I actually flew down to New York, drove from New York to Connecticut, was in meetings in Connecticut, drove back to New York, crashed for a night there, and then flew home. So I did like 30 hours of travel in like 3 days between planes, airports, cars, and then spent the rest of that time in hotels or working. So I really didn't get a chance to do a lot of playing. I've had a few games since I got back, which has been nice, but it's also the long weekend up here. We do our long weekend a week before yours. So you guys have Memorial Day next week. I actually have tomorrow off. Tomorrow's a holiday here. So
what holiday is that?
Victoria Day, because we're still a colony.
Oh, hey. We're not a colony anymore. Have you heard of that story? We're not. We wrecked the British, if you will. But hey, whatever's working for you guys, that's great. As for me, I played a bit of Hearthstone. I actually didn't get to play a lot until like the last couple days. Started playing Dragon Warrior, which is pretty dope. It was the Tides of Time list, and it was a lot of fun. We went 15-4 with it on stream, and streaked up to, I think we're at the top of rank 9 or bottom of rank 8, somewhere around there. And I'll stream a little bit more throughout the week and hopefully get up to that 5-4 rank. I don't think I'll be making much of a push, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been, there's just so much Shaman on ladder right now, and that deck wrecks Shaman so hard. And it's not even fair. It's not even funny. We had a couple lucky, really amazing top decks too, where, what was it? I needed a blood to Ichor to activate my my Garrosh. And so, or Grommash, not Garrosh, my Grommash. And got it, I think, it was against a Shaman who was wrecking me. Top deck a Doomhammer. And then we top deck a Blood to Ichor. Ended up taking 10 to face. It was amazing. It was a lot of fun. So absolutely in love with that deck right now. So it's been a lot of fun.
Sounds awesome. Although I got to tell you, I get like PTSD now every time somebody uses the word Doomhammer. It's just so prevalent right now, and it's all anyone will talk about. There was a thread on Reddit a while back saying it should be a legendary weapon because of its status, and then that would mean that you could only run one of them, and it would reduce the consistency of Shaman. And like, it's probably going to be one of the cards that gets a very close look taken at it when the next balance tuning patch comes around, whether that's with the next set or for the next standard year, the year of the horse or whatever. But
the horse, the year of the horse. That is totally the name of the episode.
I hope it's the year of the horse.
Oh man, the year of the horse. I'm typing it. You're gonna hear. I
hear that right now. So it's definitely a card that I think is gonna get looked at. We'll find out.
I definitely think it will too. I wonder if they'll change it to legendary. I mean, it is good, but the thing that makes it like the best is just how it synergizes with a Rockbiter weapon. It's still good. I mean, you're still talking 16 damage. You're talking 4 damage per turn. That's still a lot of, I think I'm doing that right. I think I'm doing that math right. 16 damage. I don't know. Like I get it. It is powerful and it's really annoying. But that's why you just run Harrison, you know? Fatigue yourself.
There's nothing to say they couldn't introduce more weapon removal. And we've talked before in previous episodes about, since Old Gods and the rotation to standard, how oppressive weapon classes are because it's such efficient removal. The game is really light on healing, so you can take weapons to face. The game is really light on death rattles, so you can always consistently remove board presence with weapons. There's a lot of things about weapon tech in the game right now in general that just feel really not great sometimes. And I think that's something that they can solve rotationally within the format. It just means that right now it's going to be really, really prevalent. But having said that, we are expecting 3 sets over the course of 2016. And we're probably due to get the next one, right? Because we'll get one at BlizzCon, obviously, but we're probably due to get the next one over the summer, right? Like June, July, probably not.
I'm not ready. Oh my God, that's way too soon. I can't handle it.
But Old Gods was really late, right? Like the gap between League of Explorers and Old Gods was the longest we've been in any one meta. I don't think they can afford to wait much longer than the summer. Like if it was any later than August, it would be too late again, because they will likely put out something at BlizzCon, right? And if they're going to do something in early November, you really have to get the next set out so that there's a nice clean gap between those two as well.
And it would definitely make sense, especially if they do like an adventure where it's only 25, 30, 35 new cards, where it's not 130 and all these big sweeping changes stuff. So yeah, you're right. That makes sense. I guess I could see that. Yeah.
I'm hoping. I mean,
you're ready? You're ready already?
Well, Old Gods has not been my personal favorite expansion, right?
Why not?
So
why not?
It hasn't made the game as interesting to me as some of the previous ones did. I was really excited by how significant some of the changes were in previous ones. Like, look at how crazy the game went when we got Emperor Thaurissan, and how the game has never recovered from that. It's always been such a huge factor after that set came out. Look at how massive Reno Jackson was, and how crazy that made the game, and how you had to totally rethink everything you knew about your strategy for the game. Old Gods, really all it did was say, we're going to add some really impossible things to answer as 10 mana finishers that are neutral and can get dropped into any class. Like, they didn't add, I don't think, the same amount of decision making. They just said, if a game goes late, someone's going to be able to play one card and win. And that, to me, was not as exciting. But we're getting crazy hardcore off topic here. We should.
I mean, it's just the two of us. It's just the two of us. This is really interesting to me. I think people will find this really interesting too. I think this is actually a good topic. Right. So let's circle back here, because that really surprises me that you find Reno Jackson and Emperor Thaurissan to be vastly different and what it's done for the meta compared to, obviously plenty of Cthulhu stuff out there. We're seeing things like N'Zoth Paladin. We are seeing some, what are some other big fancy cards? I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, when you look at the meta reports and stuff right now of some of these really competitive decks, there's a lot of stuff we haven't seen before, or a lot of change and iteration. Look at how mid-range Hunter has changed. It's not fundamentally different, but there's some really cool new cards in there as well. I was actually saying, like, I think this is the healthiest in a few ways that I've seen Hearthstone since we started podcasting about it.
And I'll agree with you there, but I think you actually hit the nail on the head there when you said, right, that, I mean, what we've seen have not been cards that introduced a ton of new archetypes, right? Like you said, we've seen Paladin, right? Like a control type Paladin that previously would have been Anyfin Paladin is now N'Zoth Paladin instead, right? We've seen a mid-range hunter that was always a mid-range hunter cycle out a couple of cards and play some slightly different spells for finishers. Because they're not forced to go quite as fast and they're not as heavily reliant on traps with Mad Scientist cycling out. But like the game itself really didn't say, you know what you're going to play now is you're going to play this super cool control style spell driven hunter, despite the fact that they've been trying in some way to push that forever. There's not a lot
load hunter this week.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, point I'm making, right, is that we're not getting a crazy shift because there haven't been a ton of things that have been made possible by new cards. We've taken existing deck archetypes and refined them using new cards that facilitate those things, right? Reno made a whole new style of gameplay possible that didn't exist before because the closest corollary we had was something like Handlock. Emperor Thaurissan made a whole new style of gameplay possible with the combo decks that were reliant on things like Malagos that were mathematically impossible prior to his introduction, right?
Yeah, but where are they now?
Being played all the time. I mean, it wasn't there that thing on Reddit just today that said that Emperor Thaurissan was like the most significant neutral legendary in the game right now?
I mean, it's definitely the most played, but it's not because... I don't think that it's because they're played in these really crazy combo decks as much as they, for every ticket you get, it's half an innervate every turn. And like, I think that's why it played, just like Sylvanas, kind of goes in and out, but just like why Sylvanas is played is you can't really build a deck around Sylvanas, but it has to be removed and it really can't hurt you. To do. And so like Thaurissan is this thing where, honestly, when you're building a deck and you're hitting 27, 28 cards and you don't know what to add, you add a Thaurissan because might as well at least make it cheaper. And so I don't know, like I'll give you Reno. Reno, I totally agree with. Reno
right, isn't actually a build around card. Like you have to keep it in mind when you're designing a deck, but you're not building to a Reno based win condition. Like he's just a part of a package that facilitates the way you play the game. Build around cards are bad for the game. Like build around cards like Cthulhu and playing to Cthulhu kind of suck, frankly.
Well, I mean, you have themes. Like you definitely want to have themes in your decks, and I think that's something. That's why not Reno, but that's why like N'Zoth exists and Cthulhu exists, is because you want to have these themes that you do build around. Because if I'm understanding you correctly, so a non-build around for me feels like Shaman right now. You're not really building around anything. You're just trying to put out the best cards for the best mana on the turn. Whereas Reno, you're trying to be able to outlast and, eventually, outlast your aggro, get your Reno out and keep, kind of keep on trucking along and eventually just overwhelm. And I don't know, man, this is the first time I've ever disagreed with you on this show.
Yeah, very first time.
Oh,
it's
man.
You know what? It's probably something worth coming back to. One day we could do a big special on deck building and really talk through the logic of how we do that, because I think that's where you start to understand that there are cards in the game that make you feel like you have to play to them or because of them. And I don't necessarily love them. I don't love cards that do that. I don't love any of the cards that were added in Old Gods that just, if you can play them, you win, right? Because within reason, that's what the Old Gods are, is if you can play N'Zoth and get value, you win the game. If you can play Cthulhu and you've played the rest of the game using all the things that facilitate Cthulhu, you win the game. And we've been struggling for so long to explain to people why, like Force Roar was so bad for the game, or right now, currently, why Miracle and, Leroy Double Cold Blood is so bad for the game, because you don't get a choice. The game is over because the other person could pull that off. Like that stuff has never been super interesting to me, and I don't think the game is better because of it. But
all right,
there's something here for sure.
All right, okay. Let's talk about some news, because I have a feeling we have some more stuff that we don't agree on, and this is gonna be a fun show for everybody. So let's talk about let's go to the news.
Here we go.
This week in Hearthstone, Heroes of Warcraft.
All right, as the resident tournament expert, Kev, I'll let you take this next one away for us.
Sure. So, as expected, with last week having been the HCT European Spring Preliminary, this week was the HCT Americas Spring Preliminary. Tournament has wrapped at this point, now that we're here recording. So, for those of you listening to the show on your audio podcast feeds, it's probably been over for a little while. We are going to spoil some results. So, if that's not your bag, skip ahead a few minutes. Real briefly, I guess, before we get into the juicy stuff, we will talk winners. So we know the 8 people who are advancing to the America's Spring Final. And cool, again, that it's 8 players that really are not known. They're all amateurs. They have no meaningful tournament appearances prior to this, or tournament successes, I guess I should say. They're not big money winners. You wouldn't look them up on esportsearnings.com. So the 8 people who advanced were Sidonia, Napoleon, Rosti, PNC, Joster, Bradford Lee, Dear Jason, and Dwayne. I don't know, John, did you catch much of the tournament? What did you think of the America's Spring Preliminary?
So I caught the first day almost completely, and I caught bits and pieces of the second day. I definitely did feel like there was a significant improvement in overall player performance this time versus last time. I feel like last time there was a lot of, and again, as a one-time legend player who does a podcast, I am by no means like the authority for correct and excellent play and not correct and excellent play. But I just remember seeing pro players, commentators, forums during the winter preliminaries for EU and NA. There was a lot of amateur play happening, not the top best plays, and a lot of mistakes happening, and did not see hardly any of that this time around. Saw a lot of really strong play, a lot of really close matches, a lot of really cool decks. You know, again, another thing where it's like, there was a lot of cool decks. Yeah, there was a lot of redundancy. A lot of people brought Zoo. A lot of people brought, or everybody brought Shaman. But, you know, those other 2 decks, typically, everyone was kind of, you know, in or out. You'd see Warrior, Paladin. You'd see not Priest, not Druid. But, you know, there was a good amount of variety there. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. Production quality, no noticeable big improvements, but Blizzard's always done well for their own events for production quality and value. And so all in all, I think it was a really, really well done tournament. I think the players played well, and I think the winners definitely of these groups are definitely the ones who deserve to be there. -1, perhaps, which we will talk about in a little bit. What did you think?
Well, I mean, I think for the most part, I agree with you. I did think it was a little bit rough, I guess, to know that like every single player was going to bring Shaman with almost no exceptions. Despite the fact, and like, this is hilarious, right? It's hilarious to be having this conversation. I would love to go back and tell me of 6 months ago that we were going to be mad that every player was bringing Shaman at the pro level in a world where we hadn't seen Shaman played at a competitive level in a meaningful sense ever, really. So, I mean, yeah, I would love to see the game get some tweaks. And actually, I think there's a piece about the meta that we're going to talk about a little bit later that will speak to this as well. But the amount of people that are running Zoo, for example, does feel kind of frustrating. The amount of people who are running Miracle Rogue, I don't love. And I think there's definitely room for the game to be healthier as things change in that regard. But you're right, the gameplay was very well done. There were some very cool, very innovative decks brought. Some that didn't do as well as people were hoping they would, like Tides of Time's Control Shaman list, some of that kind of stuff. Like, there's some cool stuff. But I mean, if you were to go back and look at the top 8 players and what they brought, like, you're going to see a lot of the same, right? You're going to see a lot of Shaman, which was almost exclusively banned pretty much across the board. A lot of Miracle Rogue, a lot of Warlock, in some cases Zoo, in some cases Reno, but a lot of Warlock, and a lot of Warrior. However, as we've already spoken about in previous shows, Warrior, at least, there were lots of different versions of Warrior. Control Warrior, Dragon Warrior, Tempo Warrior, Aggro Warrior, Pirate Warrior, Cthulhu Warrior. Like, there's lots of kinds of Warrior. If you look at 10 players Warrior lists from this event, I don't think you're going to see 2 that are the same.
That's fair. Yeah, that's definitely fair. I would definitely agree with that. Warrior, of all the classes right now, I think Warrior is the healthiest.
It's the most interesting, I think. It feels like it's in the best place in terms of variety.
Yeah, there's just so much that you can do and make a semi-competitive deck, and that's a good thing to have. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about this next topic, because I think this is interesting. There's a lot of hullabaloo. There's not a lot of hullabaloo. So basically, how it looks is this: Amnesiac from Team Archon won the NA Winter Championships just a few months ago, and is back again competing for his spot, or for money. Basically, he's got a spot. He's just there for money, I guess. And so plays day 1, goes, I believe he goes 1-2, correct? So he won. He's in the losers bracket, but he's won and he's beat a couple people, and then comes out this morning to say, "Hey, I'm dropping out of the tournament. It's my sister's graduation, and there's only going to be one of those, and that's where I want to invest my time, and that's the choice I'm making." That one of his former opponents says something not nice on Twitter, whatever, but it gets the community talking a little bit about, okay, what just happened here? Is this an okay thing to happen, that a player can mid-tournament drop out? And is that okay? What impacts does that have on the other players that he beats? Or the fact that his next opponent would have been a teammate? And is that all okay? And it's an interesting conversation. We're gonna walk around it delicately, I guess, so we don't step on too many toes one way or another. But Kev, give us your thoughts on this situation going so far.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we touch anything else about how we feel or how we perceive the reaction to this, I want to make it very clear from the outset: there's no way to draft a rule that is fair, equitable, realistic, reasonable in any way, shape, or form that isn't just you can drop out at any time for any reason. Expecting anything other than that is impossible. And you've always got the outcome where there would have to be an exception made at some point to any rule other than that, because you're going to end up with a building on fire or a medical emergency or something awful that I don't even want to discuss. But people need to be able to drop out at any time for any reason. That's the reality. Esports has this really specific and odd expectation that people will try their best all the time, no matter what, and they'll never say, "Yeah, no, I can't do it. I woke up and I felt tired. I had an injury. I'm stressed. I need to go home." Whatever. When a player can't compete, people lose their minds. They couldn't get a visa, or there was some other barrier to their participation. Then we riot. But once a person is there, the expectation is that no possible circumstance exists under which they won't perform and dance like a monkey for entertainment purposes. I don't buy that. I think the rule will always have to be you can just drop, and that can be for whatever reason. There will be times where it's unsportsmanlike to not participate. There will be times where it's unfair to viewers because they expected a big tournament and lost out on that experience, especially if they were like a paid spectator at a live event. I get that. I really do. But you can't have a different rule. So with that said, I actually think that the choice he made is totally fine. The only reason that anyone could possibly, in my mind, be upset about this is the question of, was there an ulterior motive? Was there some type of collusion where he agreed to back out because he was about to face a teammate and he didn't need to qualify, so he stepped out justified it by saying, I'm going to go to this convocation instead that he maybe did or didn't have to go to. We don't know. And really, it's not even fair to speculate on that. That's ridiculous. But that would be match fixing. That would be a very specific example of match fixing. And that is a totally separate conversation. If he did it to fix a match in an effort to help a teammate succeed in a situation where it was of no value for him to succeed, that's awful. And in every other esport would be punishable by expulsion from the league. Like flat out, you would just never play again. I don't think that's what the circumstance is here. And I'm totally fine with what happened and the outcomes. And anybody who's upset about it is, I think, just grasping for a way to feel better about having lost to someone who then backed out or something. I don't know. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. But John, what are you? Why do you disagree?
I actually, we don't fundamentally disagree on this at all. Actually, I totally agree. Number one, it's unenforceable. Anyone can and should be able to drop out at any time. I mean, that's just the way things are, and that's okay. There's a few things that could have set him up for this better. Number one, if he would have just earlier in the week said, hey guys, I'm coming to compete on the spring preliminaries this weekend for the first day because A, if I win all three, I win $2,500 because I'm in the top 16 and cash is cool. B, I get to have a great time. Blizzard flies me out. I get to, have a great time doing, seeing everybody and being part of the scene. And I have value in the scene. And I think that the scene is really important and I want to be a part of that. He could have easily avoided all of a sudden out of nowhere, almost like last minute, like, oh, I decided that my sister's graduation, I'm going to go to that now. And I need to be there for that. And that's the part that for me is just, it wasn't well done and it doesn't put him in a good light. And it means that the community is going to speculate and go, what is going on here? And I think that's okay. And I think that's natural. In the end, he's done nothing wrong, but he has hurt his reputation a little bit in the sense that he hasn't communicated properly. We don't know his true motives. And now, no matter what he says, we probably never will know. At the same time, we don't need to know. Like that, in the end, it doesn't matter if you don't want to communicate or if you don't want to compete for any reason, you don't have to. It just seems weird that, if I were him, all I would have done is earlier just say, hey, I'm coming to do this. I'm staying for the first day. Hey, I want to win money, want to support my teammates, want to support the scene. But then it's my sister's graduation. So day 2, I'm going to be doing that. That's the only thing.
Okay. But I mean, isn't it presumed at this point that because he's already going to BlizzCon, that his participation is explicitly going to be for the purposes of trying to compete for money or prestige or whatever? Like, I don't think that's even a question. So the argument there is that he's under an obligation of some form, or that any player, not just him, but any player is under an obligation to pre-qualify the possibility that they might choose to back out of an event or make other arrangements every time they compete because of external variables.
Do you think it was a might choose? Do you think that he had any intention to compete on Sunday? Because surprise graduations don't happen. So either something, and again, there's a lot of people who say his family, pressured him into it. He's 15. He's not a full grown adult. He's not a 30-year-old saying, oh, I just, figured this out. Mom and dad are making me go. But he is 15. That very well could have happened. And even then, transparency is it. And again, he is under no obligation to do so. But if he wanted to avoid something like this, this is why PR teams exist, because he's one of the most famous Hearthstone players in the world, and he's one of the best Hearthstone players in the world. And the team likes to toss out pitchforks. We literally toss out pitchforks rather than raise them. We just toss them out at people. And, in the end, it's something that, he's 15. I don't expect him to have that foresight or whatever to be like, oh, this could be seen as kind of sketchy for me to just drop randomly. And what if there's a situation that makes it look even more sketchy? Like, oh, I'm about to play my teammate now, and now I'm dropping out. And it just makes it look weird. It doesn't make him look as integral or as full of integrity as I believe he is. I believe he's a really, he is a player full of integrity, and I do believe that he has the game's best interests in mind and cares about the competitive scene. And well, in this scenario, he's caused some people to doubt that, and that's the part that sucks.
I mean, I don't think it's realistic or fair to anyone, much less literally a child, to worry about the optics of the decision-making process here. Like, it could be that he made the decision. It could be that his family said, no, tough, this is what's happening. It could be any number of things. At the end of the day, I believe very specifically the only reason that this is even a conversation in the community right now is because he's already qualified. If he wasn't already qualified and he had backed out, nobody would have brought it up, because it would have been like, oh, well, he had to make a choice and he made that choice. But the fact that he's already qualified means that it feels to people who are not Amnesiac or his family like he's afforded the privilege of making that choice at any time at the last minute, as opposed to being like, this is super important to me and I'm going to put other parts of my life on hold for it. That's the only reason I think we're even talking about it.
Well, I mean, it's to what you just said. It's just like, I knew about this the whole time, but now I'm bringing it up. And again, he probably just didn't even think to do it. Like, why would I need to tell people that I'm planning on doing that? And then telling people that I'm planning on doing that anyway is just kind of weird. And that's all it is. In the end, it just comes down to something that feels weird. He didn't do anything wrong. I don't even think he did anything marginal. Like earlier, there's people, and even myself, was like, this might feel a little bit shady. And then as I went back and looked at the bracket and looked at some tweets from earlier this week, I'm like, nah, it's really not. Probably something out of his control. But even if it wasn't, it doesn't matter, because to everyone's point, he qualified, he played, could play as long or as short as he wants. He can play as well or as poorly as he wants. Like, it's him. It's his life. He can do what he wants.
It just strikes me as so weird, because he could be like an Olympic triathlete. And if he just backed out and said, sorry, family stuff, nobody would bat an eyelash. Like, it's only in esports that we make this into this huge, like, oh, is it collusion? Is it match fixing? Is he doing the right thing by his spectators and his fans? What about the sponsors? What about the integrity of the game? Blah, 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 which would never happen in any other context. Like, it just, and even the fact that people are combing through his tweet history and trying to, like, ascertain the legitimacy, like, did he seed tweets in advance to let people know what his intentions were? Like, it boggles my mind that we're going to try and police our way through this and CSI out the answer. Like, it just seems like, no, he backed out and that's fine and that's his right. And if people are unhappy about it, tough cookies. He did something within his rights. There's no rules in the tournament or HCT or anything else that say he can't. The end.
I mean, sure. If that's what it ends up being, is can he or can't he drop out? You're totally right. That's all there is to have to the conversation. I think it's an interesting one. I really do.
It's bringing out some very interesting conversation for sure. People are raising interesting points. I would never have known that, for example, that the person he was intending to play next was a teammate if that hadn't come out in the conversation surrounding this. And that was the only thing where, in my review of this leading up to the show, I was like, okay, that could be construed as problematic. That I understand, because in other games and in other scenes, I've seen that done and it has been a punishable offense. So that's fine. I get that. Like, that's a place where you can say maybe there's something sketchy going on. But fundamentally, he exercised his rights as a player, and I don't think anyone can really say anything other than, okay, and on to the next.
Right. I think for me, if he really wanted to or cared about setting himself up for the best possible situation going in, I think he should have been just more upfront with it earlier on. As soon as he knew, I would have said it, just because of situations like this. Why isn't he here anymore? He says it's this, but why didn't he say that earlier? What's a surprise? It's not, graduation's not a surprise, and so whatever. In the end, like, I hope anyone doesn't feel too emotionally about this. We just thought it was a really interesting conversation to have. No one's calling for pitchforks or thinks that this is a super important topic about the future of Hearthstone as a professional esport and no one's calling for pitchforks. Just relax. It's all good. It's all good. But I do think it is interesting, and I do think people should care. I really think people should care.
I mean, I agree. I think it's important that this is the kind of stuff that does generate conversation. Although Malthrin in the chat actually makes a really good point that when we have these conversations, when the community is having these conversations, I have yet to actually hear anyone argue for a specific alternative. Like, what was the expectation? That he would be forced to play the games regardless, or that he shouldn't have been allowed to enter? Like, no one is actually making an argument for a policy-based alternative to what happened. They're expressing emotional frustration with some element of the way that it played out, but no one's actually proposing a solution other than what occurred. So I think there is an element of people are expressing their frustrations, they're airing their grievances, they're talking through the logistics of how should this look in the future from the perspective of expectations of players or, good conduct and sportsmanship or whatever, but we're not actually trying to solve a problem. And I think that's an important frame of reference to have as well.
Sure. Okay, let's move on. That's enough on this one.
That's enough of that.
I think we're hitting a good time here. So
all right. So next on the agenda then is the BlizzCon contests. BlizzCon is coming up that first weekend in November, and the announcement went out this week that the 2 live contests at the event and the 2 offline contests are open for initial entries. So there are 4 contests this year. As usual and expected, the costume contest will be returning. That's a highlight of BlizzCon every year. They are bringing back as well the talent contest, which has been a key live contest at Blizzard's at BlizzCon for the last, I want to say they brought it in 2013. So the last 3, now 4 BlizzCons, it's been sort of the primary entertainment contest at the live event. And then the offline contests, there's the traditional art contest as well as the movie contest. So if you are a BlizzCon attendee or not and interested in competing in those, you can find all the details about them on the BlizzCon website. John, from last year, since it was your first BlizzCon, what did you think? Like, was there a contest you really particularly loved or anything?
Didn't even catch it. I'm so sorry. Didn't even know it was a thing.
It's for sure worth your time if you don't hit anything else to watch the highlights of the costume contest, because some of the stuff people put together for that thing is unreal.
Oh yeah, for sure. I usually always check out post BlizzCon when they post up the photo albums of all the cosplay stuff. Katie and I find that really cool, especially Katie, but I think it's really amazing too. Definitely an art form, and kudos to those of you who do it. And if you don't, find something that you like and enjoy and do it. Those types of things. All right, Kev. Meta.
Beat 'em or join 'em.
Oh, no.
Before we get started, we do want to take a moment to thank our friends of the show, Martin Z, Albert T, and Sean G. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show. So incredibly. We cannot thank you enough. If you want to know more, head over to patreon.com/wellmedpodcast and find out how you can get involved. All right. So, Kev, I'm just going to let you take this one again. So, Mana Crystals came out with a State of the Meta. It's their 3rd installment of this article. I would call it an article. And pretty interesting stuff. You posted it earlier. And give us a breakdown here.
Yeah, so for those of you who have been keeping track, Mana Crystals has been trying to do this on a more or less weekly basis, put out something about how the meta looks in a post-Old Gods world in Standard. And so the newest of this series of articles came out it looks like on Thursday, actually. Or no, sorry, Friday. And on Friday, they put out an article that goes through some of the expectations of the rankings of the different decks they're seeing in Standard, popular deck lists or styles for most of the classes. Nothing that would surprise you. Aggro Shaman, Miracle Rogue, N'Zoth Paladin, all the way down. They do highlight the wide variety of warrior decks really well, which I thought was really cool. And they're spotlighting Hunter this week. So they've got a couple of specific mid-range Hunter lists that have done very well in sort of the top 20 legend rank range. Very similar deck lists. Not a lot of big surprises there, but cool if you want to try playing Hunter because it is doing a good job of targeting certain things in the meta. They also, in this particular article, went on to break down the deck lists from the EU preliminary from last weekend. So they went through the top 16 deck lists from DreamHack Austin, the deck lists from the top 8 players from the EU Spring Preliminary, looked at the distribution of different archetypes as well as those archetypes' win rates. And that was some of the coolest stuff to me. So I was really surprised to see how well Reno Warlock has been performing, which I think was the one that stood out to me. But I mean, what did you take away from it, John?
So a couple of things for me. I love Hunter being highlighted because I think that is one of the better kind of anti-meta picks. It does so well against Shaman and actually does really well against Warrior, which also does well against Shaman and Zoo. And so I think that's a really great like Warrior, like Tempo Warrior or Dragon Warrior or one of these kind of mid-rangey type hunters, I think are perfect picks right now. If you're seeing a lot of Zoo and you're seeing a lot of, oh my gosh, why can't I think about it? Zoo and Shaman. There it is. When you're seeing a lot of those two, I think that those are really good decks to pick. I really like the way that they've kind of broken this down to kind of talk about, they've got the standard rankings. They're talking about multiple decks. It's very full featured. I think Tempo Storm still does a better job at like overall organizing it, but I love the content in here a lot. Not a lot from Priest, obviously. So Priest is kind of blah right now, but maybe they'll figure themselves out here one of these weeks. Someone's got to find something to make Priest viable again. But yeah, I love Hunter right now. I think Hunter and Warrior are two awesome classes and decks to be running going further.
Yeah, tend to agree. I mean, I think there are some takeaways in here that maybe are not applicable to the average player. Things like the performance rate of decks like Freeze Mage. We know from what we're seeing on ladder right now that a lot of that type of stuff doesn't work because you lack some of the core efficiency pieces to make it happen, like Mad Scientist. It's still a deck that in specific matchups in a tournament environment, I think is going to be brought. But even in this week's America's Spring Preliminary, didn't tend to fare really well. Freeze Mage was one of the decks that got really beat up on over the course of the last 2 days. So interesting, though, that that you bring up Priest, because I think that's a really good segue into the other meta piece we were going to discuss this week, which is a thread that came up on the Hearthstone subreddit. I don't want to mispronounce this guy's names, but Axros was the user who published this. And basically, he's gone through and looked at the rate at which you are offered cards in Arena. And I think this actually is a very interesting conversation because at the rate that cards are being introduced, the game has always clearly favored minions, and removal has always been at something of a premium. We're seeing that in Constructed in Standard, but in Arena, it's amplified by the fact that there's a weight on which cards are being offered, and things are weighted towards class cards. They're weighted towards the current expansion, and you end up with a situation where, based on the numbers, and he's like the analysis is very thorough. We'll link the thread in the show notes, and if you want to go look at the math, you can see it for yourself. But basically, there's a 30% chance that, a 30% less likelihood that you will receive a spell in general in Arena now because of the weighting system and because of how much of the premium removal existed in the classic set, where most new cards that are being introduced and being weighted towards by the system are minions. So his conclusion was basically that the probability of being offered a spell has decreased by almost 30%. Overall, that means if you were to draft a spell whenever it was offered in a typical Arena deck now, you will draft 3.36 fewer spells overall. And most of the premium removal, most of the good like board sweepers and stuff were in Classic. So we've been steadily moving away from their availability and suppressing the ability for people to play with spells in Arena. I thought this was super interesting, John, but what did you think?
Definitely super interesting. I would ask, I think the question I would pose to the Hearthstone team is this intentional? Do you want players playing with less spells than have been in Arena or more? And a couple things too, a disclaimer, I don't know if you said it The original poster does say that they classify anything that isn't a minion as a spell. So that does include weapons and things like that. And so that is a consideration in that. Not that I think it's a major one or takes away from the argument, but it is important to know that those are seen as the same. But, in the end, I would ask the question, because like some people love playing with spells. Some people hate playing with spells. Some people think spells are the best thing to happen to Hearthstone and super important to class, their class identity. And there are other people who think that, that doesn't necessarily come from there. And I would love to hear what the Hearthstone team has to say about, oh yeah, you get less spells now because we want there to be more back and forth play with minion base and arena rather than drafting as many board clears or whatever that you can muster when you are playing your arena run. And I guess that would be kind of, I think, the more revealing thing in that. What do you think, Ev? Do you think that they're intentionally doing this, or do you think that this is maybe an unforeseen byproduct of some of these new expansions?
Well, I mean, I think the system was always set up to work this way. I think the game was designed to value spells or weapons or removal at a premium. I think that Arena in particular was really meant to be a game that was played around board state because you didn't have the ability to select for removal. You had to work with the choices you were given. So the game did tend to sort of coalesce around minion-based combat in a more specific fashion than it does in a typical constructed game. I brought it up because you made mention of the priest problem, and I think priest is one of those classes where they didn't get enough good removal in the original classic set, and so we saw a lot of priest removal stuff like light bomb introduced in GVG. We've seen Entomb since introduced in League of Explorers. Like, I think priest is one of the classes where they haven't found a good mix of removal, and I think it's interesting because you mentioned the developer problem, and I saw a back and forth between Dean Ayala and Brian Kibler on Twitter. And basically, Kibler's point as they were going back and forth was that there's a lot of stuff in the classic set still, things like Ice Block or Doomhammer or Auctioneer that feel like they don't belong in an evergreen set because they're going to have such a permanent influence on the way the game is played. And those cards not rotating is more of a constructed problem. But I think about what that's done to Arena because they don't, as a general rule, tend to introduce a lot of new spells, a lot of new removal. The game is reliant on, like you said, that sort of class identity that was introduced by the basic and classic cards that aren't going anywhere. So it does become very difficult. Like, how do you introduce new removal and new utility to classes, which would solve the problem because with the Arena weighting system, if they did introduce new removal, you'd see it all the time. If there was a Flame Strike 2, right? Slightly more expensive version, like the Doom to Twisting Nether Flame Strike equivalent, right? Something that cleared the board for 5 damage and you discarded a card for every minion it killed. I don't know, who knows? Doesn't matter. There would be maybe a weighting system still in Arena that would prefer that, and you would see more of it because it's a class card, because it's a recent expansion class card. That's not likely what's going to happen because of how the game has been designed. So Arena, unless they do something about that, is just going to slowly drift to a point where you might do an Arena run and never be offered a spell. And statistically, the likelihood of that is increasing over time.
Increasing meaningfully?
I mean, not at a specifically like massive rate, but you have to remember that Arena is always going to be played in Wild, and a vast majority of the cards introduced in each set are minions versus spells. The ratio overall may not change, but it's changing enough by virtue of not introducing removal specifically, plus the weighting that occurs in Arena to prefer cards from the most recent sets, that maybe means it's going to be a problem. Or the inverse could occur, right? They could introduce a set that does offer a lot of spells and a lot of premium removal, and then Arena would be decided by who got the draft that had the most flame strikes all over again, like it used to be.
Right,
I don't know,
right.
but it is a problem that's inherent to the weighting system, and I don't know if Blizzard has decided how that should work long term, because Arena at this point feels like it's not getting the same kind of attention that Constructed is in that like long term planning regard. Constructed got so much value out of Standard and format rotations and major card nerfs, and Arena really didn't. Like nothing changed for Arena. Arena got some new cards. It didn't get the Cthulhu cards, and that was it. Like we don't really know what the long-term vision for Arena really is.
Right. And I really am holding on to a pretty major Arena revamp. I think it's about time to really take that. We've finally seen the Hearthstone team recognize the 110 challenge, which is kind of cool. And they did their kind of little sponsored thing there. But I really do think that it is time for a ladder rework. Number one, come on. But also an Arena revamp as well. I just think it's kind of getting to that point, and maybe stuff like this has also happened because it's not important enough to fix right now with things that may be coming and being changed in the future, like near future.
And credit where credit's due, right? When Hearthstone came out, it felt like they were just scrambling to keep up. The game was massively popular. The uptake was way higher than they expected it to be. The content production cycle process was very new to them because traditionally Blizzard has had years to work on major expansions. And now it was like, no, like we need new cards constantly. Just drop that stuff on us every 3 months. We need another hit of that Hearthstone cocaine. Like it's just got to keep coming. And now, like, I feel like they've really stopped, sort of dialed back and said, wait, okay, let's think about what's good for the game long term. How do we build this in a way that's going to work for the next 10 years, not the next 10 months? And that was what the whole thought process around standard and format rotations felt like to me. And I think that you're right. They're probably at a place where now they're ready to have a conversation like that about Arena and about ladder season durations and all the systems that originally were just like, yep, this is how it's going to work. It's doing great. If you'll recall, they reworked a bunch of that stuff during the beta because they were unhappy with it. We have technically seen changes, but they were just very minor. They increased the length of a maximum arena run from 9 to 12. They made changes to the ranking system with the old like Ruby Star Master system into the current 25 rank system that we see today. But there's and seasons weren't at a fixed month length. They were just reset kind of ad hoc whenever. I think they didn't make a long-term plan. I think they settled on something that was iterative within what they had already done because they had a system in place. But there's nothing stopping them from doing a major rework of those systems.
It's time. I definitely think it's time. All right, let's hit up on this last thing here. And this is going to be cool. So what we wanted to do, if you guys have listened to the show before, you've heard of a little segment called Where Are They Now? Which is where we go back and take a look at some cards that may have fallen out of the meta, maybe aren't in the meta anymore at all, or maybe are brand new, and have a conversation about what puts them in the meta, why they're here, and just kind of have a fun conversation. And so we've got 3 cards we want to talk about. The first one is really fun. We saw this at the preliminaries for NA and EU quite a bit. It's Crazed Alchemist. So Crazed Alchemist is a 2-mana 2/2 that reads, Battle Cry, swap the attack and health of a minion. Now, this card is a very specific tech against one specific card, but also has other valuable uses and stuff, and it is flexible enough to be used even when you're playing against a deck that doesn't have this specific card. But the card that we are talking about is Doomsayer. So Doomsayer is that wonderful, awesome 2-mana 0/7 that destroys everything on the board at the start of your next turn, right? That's what it specifically says? Great. So basically for 2 mana, you can deal with that, not have to either have that tank 7 of your damage or for you to have to lose your board. So really, really kind of effective card. And I love the way that this is being teched. The stats are fine. There are other minions out there that this benefits from as well. So I think it's pretty neat. There's a couple of those. What's the druid one where is it Claxy Amber Weaver that goes up to 410 on 4?
Yep.
That's been pretty effective as well. So now you're only having to do 4 damage instead of 10 damage, or, so it makes a lot of sense based on some of these cards that coming out. Kev, what do you think here?
I mean, I think this is a card that belongs in a lot of places. You're talking about it, and you're right that it is it was introduced back into the meta as a way to answer Doomsayer. It was brought about as a way to say, okay, how do I stop dealing with Doomsayer? But there's so many cards in the meta right now that this can target or be used defensively on, right? I look at this and think, as a player, whatever deck I'm introducing this in, this is a great answer to something like a Bloodhoof Brave. If I don't have some better way to remove low attack minions, or I'm not going to Cabal Shadow Priest it or whatever, it's also very useful, and people constantly forget this. If you're playing a deck that has any kind of spell-based or aura-based buffs on your board, because it uses the current health and attack values, but then if there's something like, for example, a Direwolf Alpha in play, you actually swap the additional attack value onto the health and then get additional attack value again because you still have an adjacent minion. So there's ways that you can manipulate it and get a little extra value out of it if it's just in there as a defensive tool. And like you said, you don't end up targeting something like a Doomsayer with it. I think there's a lot of application for this card in a lot of decks right now. I think it's something that probably, to your point from earlier, might actually end up being brought back in Priest, because it's one of the only ways that you can get around the 4 attack dead spot. And that's something that a lot of people are really struggling with right now, because there's so many really good 4 attack minions.
Yep.
It's not like the good old days of like, oh, he played an Azure Drake, I need to find a solution to that. It's, oh god, he played Twin Emperors, and now I've got 2 4 attack taunts on the board that I have no response to. That's a huge issue, but it's way easier to swap those attack values and trade something cheaper up, or be able to use Shadow Word Death. There's lots of applications for this card. So I think it's something that people are going to run pretty reliably for the foreseeable future, because it has so many applications. And as long as you've taken into consideration a way to get some kind of defensive value out of it, if you can't use it to destroy a Doomsayer, it's a phenomenal tech right now, and a card that does a lot of work in a meta that's so free of big game hunters and so free of silences.
I will say, so something that I really do believe is, if Doomsayer was not so prevalent, I honestly don't know how much we would see this card, or at all. And you'll probably disagree with me, Kev. That's okay. I understand. You're smarter than me. I get it. But it's just, Doomsayer is really deciding a lot of these early turn games, especially against things like Aggro Shaman. And it's something that it's less, again, you're right. It's incredibly flexible. And even if an opponent doesn't have Doomsayer, you can find ways to use it. And a 2-mana 2/2 on stat, especially with as powerful as most viable decks minions are right now, it just isn't really, it really isn't, you're not really losing too much by including at least one. But that tempo that you can get using this card is totally worth it for those times that you maybe get a little tempo. But I really think that without Doomsayer in it right now, I don't know if it would totally be ran. For sure, way less. Question is, at all, or at the rate previous before this kind of new meta has kind of come up here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why I would be wrong on that.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I think that it's really not a big deal, because it's not the answer that you're trying to use to something like a tempo Doomsayer is still a good play, and frankly, I don't know that Crazed Alchemist is as good against a tempo Doomsayer. Like, yeah, it takes it off the board, but your entire turn is spent using that and protecting your 1/3 Trog or whatever. Like, that's not really the same consideration. I think this is a card that just has way more applications in a post-silence world, right? It used to be that you could get around Doomsayer very easily with a 2-mana Ironbeak Owl. There's so little silence. I honestly, I had been playing a bunch of N'Zoth Priest, and I couldn't tell you the last time I had a card get silenced. Like, I actually can't remember seeing a silence played against me since Old Gods came out. It's just such a slow mechanic and so expensive on most cards, and it's so late in the game because the only one being run is Spellbreaker. Like, it just doesn't come up. It's not an issue anymore, which is interesting, because it means that if you need answers to things, sometimes you have to look back into the annals and find cards like this. And I think one of the other cards we're going to talk about is back for a very similar reason, because it's just so prohibitively difficult to get good removal in the absence of silence.
Okay, interesting. I don't know if I totally agree, but That's all right. That's all right. Let's talk about this next one, Kev. I really like you picked this next card out, and I love the reasons that you picked this one out. So give us the skinny.
Yeah, so this was actually brought to my attention by a friend on a private forum who was referring back to a tempo rogue that Life High had been working on and streaming pretty actively. And one of the cards that he had introduced into it was Illidan's Storm Rage. So for those of you who haven't seen Illidan, probably ever, because honestly, I don't think I've ever seen this card intentionally played out of hand in the game. It's a 6 mana, 7 attack, 5 health demon with card text that reads, whenever you play a card, summon a 2/1 Flame of Azzinoth. So this was basically, you were hoping to see Illidan get spawned by Bane of Doom, maybe, up until this point. It was about the only time I think it ever entered play. Or you might have gotten it by accident after releasing or something, but no one actually put this card in a constructed deck list. And I think this is a really clever tech because the deck he's put it into is a tempo rogue. So it's a rogue that's not miracle styled. It doesn't have a Leroy finisher. It doesn't run Cold Blood or Conceal. But being able to spawn tokens, right, off of Violet Teachers has always been super powerful. And Illidan spawns better tokens. They're actually more aggressively statted in the same way that you would get from Violet Teacher. And it's not specific to spells. It's any card, which is a very powerful effect. It used to be that Illidan was a really poor choice in a lot of cases because, number one, he died to Big Game Hunter. And Big Game Hunter was so prevalent that running a bad, no immediate impact 7 attack minion like this was a really poor choice. And you weren't going to run Illidan in a 1-cost card over something like Dr. Boom, right? It was just there were too many better options. But there was also so there was Big Game Hunter was 1. And 2, I think, was 5 health was a real problem. There were lots of ways to answer 5 health. And frankly, in a lot of cases, there still are. But this is now a card where, especially in Rogue, because you can play so many cards for such a low cost, you can flood the board the same way you would with a Violet Teacher. And there's no other way to get this this effect, right? Outside of Violet Teacher or Illidan, how else can you spawn tokens by playing cards? I don't think there's another way.
Not in Rogue, no.
Well, in much of anything. I mean, there were times where people tried to make things like Imp Master or something work to generate tokens on an ongoing basis, and cards that we no longer see because of the rotation, like Implosion, where you could get a whole bunch of tokens. But this is a super powerful effect when you stop and think about it. If every card you play spawns a 2/1 minion, that's a very difficult thing to answer. And I think this is actually a very powerful card that people have just totally forgotten about because you didn't worry about it at all in a BGH filled world. And BGH, another one of those cards where I haven't seen a BGH since Old Gods was introduced.
I think a lot of it too has to do with the lack of better Death Rattle minions in that slot.
True.
There was a lot of 5 mana. I mean, it was really for 5 health. You were comparing Lotheb, Sylvanas, and Thorson, at that 5 health slot. And in the end, this just doesn't really cut it compared to those. And having those kind of fall out and not as many Death Rattle cards, being in, I think it also makes a lot of sense for these to be for this specific card to be a lot more prevalent, especially in Rogue, as it continues to kind of iterate on beyond the miracle stuff and starts kind of working on some other archetypes as well.
Well, I mean, I think Rogue was the natural place for it to sort of make an appearance. But after seeing it in a Rogue list, I thought about it for a while and thought, realistically, like this could actually be very powerful in a token style Druid as well. I think Druid could get a ton of mileage out of something like this, especially with all of the different buff cards, because the same way as you would play Violet Teacher into Power of the Wild, you could get very similar mileage out of something like this. And there's a lot of people trying to find something that'll make Druid work, right? I think there's enough different ways that you can flood the board now as Druid, whether it's Wisps of the Old Gods or Onyxia. There's lots of cards that people have been trying to make work as ways to just put a ton of stuff on the board and set up big Power of the Wild, Savage Roar type turns. I think this is one of those cards. And I think now that there's no BGH, people are going to see this on the ladder and start to realize how powerful it can actually be.
For sure. All right, let's talk about this last one then, and then we'll move on and get out of here. Actually, we already hit the hour-long mark. I didn't think we'd be able to talk this much without JR here. There's not as much.
Really, you didn't?
Okay, fair enough. All right, last one. Stampeding Kodo is a 5-mana 3/5 beast. It's a rare neutral minion. Reads, Battlecry, destroy a random enemy minion with 2 or less attack. Now, to be completely fair, this card has definitely dipped in and out from time to time. There have always been points where this card was being tested with one way or another, but now more than ever, it is kind of making a comeback and becoming pretty standard in quite a few different decks. Number one, because of a lot of the zoo. I mean, zoo is having a big thing to do with it. There's a lot of zoo minions and aggro shaman minions that are doing that. Being a beast, it slots in well with both druid and hunter. There's a lot of ways that they can interact with those. And it's just a great tempo play. 5 mana, 3/5, and, destroy something that could, do at most to it, 2 damage to something else is just a great play. And so you're starting to see this card return, and it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I love it. I've always liked this card, but it felt like for the longest time only Paladin would ever run it. And now that it's more than just Paladin running it, I think it's definitely deserves an honorable mention here on the show of some of these new cards making a comeback and starting being seen in the meta.
Yeah, I think the thing is this card is just such a good answer to so many things that people are so threatened by right now because removal is at such a premium and it's so hard to get stuff off the board. Kodo was another one of those things, honestly, a lot like weapons, where you didn't want to run it in a death rattle filled meta because hitting something like a haunted creeper with this was awful. Like you hated that and you didn't get good value out of it. A lot of the death rattle stuff being gone means that now you're doing things like removing Imp Gang Boss without triggering it. You're removing Bloodhoof Brave without setting off the Enrage. There's a lot of that type of stuff where the tempo swing value of playing it is massive because the 3/5 for 5 really is overcost by maybe 1 mana. So as long as you kill something worth at least 1 mana, you're doing great. But most of the time, people are using it and targeting things that are worth 3, 4 mana at a time. And that's an enormous tempo swing. And like you said, the Beast synergy is also amazing. Like it's perfect to be able to set up a really nice turn 6 like Houndmaster Hero Power, or be able to follow up with any of the stuff in Druid that benefits from Beast. Beast Druid, one of those things that still I don't think anybody has quite solved yet, but this would be one of the core cards in that alongside Druid of the Claw on 5. So I think it's a really smart card to be playing again because there's so little silence, because there's so few death rattles. It's probably not just a tech card, right? This is actually going to be something that's going to stick around until we start to see new stuff introduced into the game that punishes it, because otherwise there's really no reason not to run it right now, is I think the thing. You never feel bad about triggering a death rattle minion or hitting something that you didn't want to hit with it. Like it's almost exclusively going to be valuable. Does great against even like the one pseudo viable aggro paladin style that relies on Divine Shield, because it kicks right through Divine Shield, and killing even an Argent Squire with this frankly feels really good.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, I think that's gonna do it for this week's segment on Where Are They Now. If you guys have other cards that you think are making a comeback that we might have missed, send us an email, wellmet@blizzpro.com, and maybe we can talk about them in a future show. All right, so emails. We got one email. I'm not playing the thing because I haven't updated yet, and we're just not going through that this week. I can't handle it. So
somebody record us a really sweet voiceover of saying like we've got mail or something. Send it in. If it's cool, we'll edit it into a sounder for the show.
Otherwise, I'll have one done in the next 2 months.
Otherwise, John will make me do it, and no one wants that.
Oh no, no, that won't happen. That won't happen. Anyways, if you have any questions or thoughts you want to share about the show, send us your emails to wellmet@blizzpro.com. This one comes from Elock. He actually emailed us. I'm assuming but he or she or they send us an email last week, but we couldn't get to it due to time, so we're answering it this week. So Elock says, Hey guys, absolutely love the podcast. I really enjoy the balance your hosts bring on the discussions. I had a question I hope you all can help me understand. Ever since Old Gods released, it seems that 75% of my games in Standard are against Shaman, usually aggro. I play a lot of different types of decks, but it seems no matter what I play, there's almost no strategy involved at all on my end. It would seem that Shaman is only balanced against what cards they draw, and the only class or deck like that. Am I just too green on this type of game and missing something, or is it an intended design for Shaman? Thanks, guys. Eloc. Kev, go ahead. I'll let you take the first stab at this one.
I mean, okay, for one, this is not the first time that people have made a complaint like this about a deck. I think this was honestly pretty much the thrust of most people's complaint with Secret Paladin for very similar reasons, was just, did I get the right cards? Did I curve out in order? Because it was one of those decks that won a disproportionate amount if you drew the right cards in the right order. In general, I think one of the things that's very true of Hearthstone is you can just win or lose games on the mulligan and how your deck is shuffled. We talk a lot about ladder and getting the nut draw, where you just get exactly what you need in exactly the right order. And that's going to happen for you sometimes, where you win games that you really don't even feel like you worked for. The game is over on turn 5, whether you've actually killed your opponent or not. It's over. But you are also going to be on the receiving end of that occasionally. And that's one of the things that means the game is actually well balanced, is that there are opportunities for that to happen, and you are going to be punished or rewarded for your deck building skills, determining the outcome occasionally when you do draw well. I think there are a couple of very specific things about Shaman that make it feel really oppressive. Things like being able to play Ancestral Knowledge is one of them. Back in the good old days of Face Hunter being the deck that you just didn't want to see, because whether they won or lost often came down to, did they get the cards they wanted in the right order and you didn't draw the exact right answers. Hunter didn't have any card draw, so you knew pretty much without fail that if you could stall a Hunter until about turn 7 or 8, that you would be able to turn the game around and win it, because they are now forced to top deck. There's no card draw introduced in their deck. Aggro Shaman and Shaman in general now with Ancestral Knowledge does get the ability to refill their hand a little bit, and that does make it feel like you're never safe. You're never to a point where you're like, okay, I survived the initial barrage, they're out of gas, there's nothing they can do. Shaman also has a lot of reach right now, even with Crackle being rotated out. There's a lot of cards that have a lot of reach. Most of the complaints I read are about Doomhammer, not about getting killed past taunts by Lightning Bolt and Lava Burst, but there's a lot of burst, there's a lot of damage. What I would say, though, is that you're not just losing to the Shaman drawing or not drawing. There are decks that can target Shaman very specifically. There are things you can do that answer it very effectively. I think what you will find over time is, even if you target Shaman, even if you build a deck that's designed exclusively to beat Shaman, you might get to a point where you win like 65% of your games against Shaman, and that'll feel really bad because you're still losing a third of the time or more. But that's the way the game works. If you're winning 100% of the time against Shaman because you had a perfect anti-Shaman deck, that would be awful. That would be terrible for the state of the game.
You'd lose again. Well, and you'd also, statistically, you'd have to lose to a lot of other types to target specifically Shaman, which...
Right, yeah. So, I mean, like, at the end of the day, yeah, it feels bad. It feels bad to lose to Shaman when they get the nut draw. You're noticing it disproportionately right now because Shaman is very powerful, and because not a lot of other decks have had the same amount of refinement put into them that Shaman has. Shaman is one of the classes that has had the most pro level play. It's had the most work done on it, and it got some real love in this set, which is frankly new. It's actually kind of hilarious. We said earlier on the show to be talking about Shaman this way. I think you need to sort of reevaluate a little more critically. Don't feel like it's impossible to win. Just sort of dial back, look at what's going well, what's not, why you're losing the games you're losing. And what you'll probably find is that sometimes you didn't mulligan correctly. Sometimes they were going to win no matter what you had. And in that case, there is nothing you could do. And that's a very low statistical probable outcome. And it's part of playing Hearthstone. You got to learn to live with it. John, what did I miss?
Nothing that I would say you missed. There's a couple of points I would like to add. Number one, almost every competitive deck currently, if you draw the nuts, you win. Like, that's just how it is. But statistically, it's highly unlikely, like, that you're going to draw specifically the best thing, or that you're in the other way around. We've all had just awful draws. You know, we've all drawn the 7, 8, 9 cards on turn 1. And we're like, well, there goes the game. Like, that's going to happen in a card game. It's a game of statistics, and statistically, you're going to have times when you draw perfect and when you don't. Especially aggro types of decks, they have very versatile cards to that they very easily synergize with each other more than others. But at the same time, they're incredibly fast, and typically aggro decks don't have a lot of card draw, and because of that, they can run out of steam. So, if you're losing a lot against Shaman, and you're knowing it, and I would say you're playing decks that are supposed to be semi-favored, and you look and you're winning 30% of your games when it's a 65% win rate, you're doing something wrong. And that's okay. You should get a coach, get a friend to watch you, slow down, go back and watch some videos or whatever to see that happen. I'm the biggest belief in coaching at like $10, $15 an hour. 1 hour will probably save you 30 of what you would try to do on your own, especially if you're an inexperienced TCG, CCG player. So I would definitely recommend looking at doing something like that. Second, this is not something new. A lot of people are saying it about aggro shaman now, but the same thing used to be said about face hunter. Required no skill, so easy to do that anybody can do it, and yet that there are very few people actually going to legend with it, and there are a lot of people complaining about it. And sometimes this is very similar. Shaman is in a very good spot and easily is one of probably the top 3 decks between the aggro, mid-range, or a hybrid kind of type of shaman. So it is one of the best decks right now. And if you're seeing a lot of it, find specific ways to counter it. Would be the last thing that I would say. And keep your head up. You're always going to find there's always a deck that people are frustrated with, whether it's a Reno or a Cthulhu or an aggro deck. Like, there's always going to be a deck that you absolutely despise and hate playing against, and are going to say it has nothing to do with skill and just the way that they draw, and if they drew differently they couldn't win, and they have to draw this way and they do, and the game is crap. There will always be decks and there will always be feelings that do that, but the more that you play, the more you'll realize how much control you do sometimes have. And that would be something I would encourage you to try to get to that place. So, anything else that you want to add to that?
I mean, the last thing I'll say is it is a short-term problem. I guarantee you, I would put money on it today now that the cards introduced by the next set will have effects that change the way the game is being played right now, because that's always one of Blizzard's primary goals when they introduce new cards, is mix up the way the game is being played. We're in a place right now where the game has less taunt than it has had traditionally, where it has less death rattle. A lot of things that favor the tech cards we talked about earlier on the show, a lot of things that favor weapon-based classes. You are going to find that there are going to be new things introduced that change that up, and especially with silence being rotated out very heavily, removal at such a premium, there's going to be lots of things that you can do to punish Shaman and everybody else who is succeeding by virtue of those things being absent right now.
Yep, totally. All right. I think we need to get out of here. This has been a fun show. Kev, as always, great to do it with you. Just you and I sometime, go on a little mandate and just hang out and talk Hearthstone. Good times. So thank you guys so much for hanging out for the show. If you do like the show, hop on over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, or you can check us out on our Patreon. Can you not, Kevin?
You certainly can. Patreon is the only way to support this show directly. We do not have any other support but the very specific support of our fans and friends, for which we are tremendously grateful. This week, we welcome 5 new people to the Well-Met family, which is really exciting. So to Jeremy H., Matthew L., Antonicus, Kelvin, and Coral, thank you so much for your contributions. We really appreciate it. It facilitates us being able to afford the equipment to produce the show, the resources to be able to stream it live, and putting together hopefully some very cool new things for you guys that we'll be able to talk more about in the weeks to come.
Yes, absolutely. As well, another way you can support the show without money, because that's okay. It's not about money. come listen to our live show. We record 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at twitch.tv/BlizzPro. Or 5-star reviews. 5-star reviews are huge. It's how we're seen on iTunes, and it's how people help discover us and find out if this is a good show to listen to. So we want to thank this week from the UK, _platypus_. That's it. I don't know if he stopped typing or if he just ends his name, but my OCD is going nuts that you end your username with an underscore. But whatever. Thank you so much for the 5-star review. And then from the USA, Conway X. Thank you so much for your iTunes reviews. We're also on Stitcher, so if you're not on Apple, you don't have iTunes, still want to leave a review, and you're on Stitcher, you can leave a review on Stitcher.com, and I check those as well. Whew. All right, let's do some shout-outs for the week. Kev, what are you up to?
Well, before I do that, I do want to say some special thank yous. Number one, to our friends of the show, Sean G, Martin Z, Albert T. You guys have been super good to us, and we're such good friends of you guys because we've gotten to know you through your support of the show. Love you guys. Thank you so much. That's really awesome. Also, I got a ton of really nice messages this week, tweets and shout outs all over Twitter and elsewhere, asking why I wasn't casting HCT these last couple of weeks. And I really appreciate hearing from you guys and knowing that what I did when I was on the broadcast meant enough to you that you're still out there talking about it. So thank you a ton. It means a lot to me. For this week, I will probably be busy getting caught up on a lot of work stuff, but I am committed to doing some Overwatch this week as it comes out. Absolutely. As well as a little streaming. So I will do a little streaming. Might be playing some
Overwatch.
Thank you. So come check it out, twitch.tv/OdinTV. And definitely follow me on Twitter as well, @lackofrealism. That's where all my witticism throughout the week between shows is stored.
Nice. Well, as for me, first and foremost, I am streaming at twitch.tv/kicktripod, and I will be doing so about 15 minutes after the show tonight. So if you guys want to hang out and watch the stream, come stop by. I'm going to be playing Overwatch, followed by some Overwatch. I'm going to sleep some Overwatch, eat some Overwatch, and then make sure I go to bed before Overwatch. A lot of Overwatch this week, but I am going to do at least one Hearthstone stream besides tonight, and that'll be fun. But man, I'm so excited for Overwatch. Even right now, the live event is going on, and I'm so tempted to just check my Twitter feed to see if anything's announced or anything's changed. But besides that, it's going to be a pretty chill week. I'm actually building Katie a gaming computer. So how amazing is this? Katie may be streaming in the near future. She wants to get into it, give it a try, and she'd be a way better streamer than anyone that I know. No offense, Kev, but she's just a really good streamer. We'll
make a contest out of it.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds really noble. A really noble thing to do.
Gonna beat your girlfriend.
Oh, man.
That came out wrong.
I have to deal with that. Yeah, right. Okay. That's going to do it for us this week. You can tune in together with your friends live every Sunday on twitch.tv/BlizzPro at 7 p.m. Pacific, or find us on your favorite podcast outlets. For updates throughout the weeks, follow us on Twitch Twitter at WellMed Podcast. WellMed is entirely supported by our fans. Find out more at patreon.com/WellMed Podcast. We also have merch at store.blizzpro.com. Awesome shirts. This week, you might be wearing your Overwatch shirts, but in a week, you're going to be back to wearing your WellMed shirts. As always, a big thank you to Jake Buttineau at jakebuttineau.ca for music and site designs for our graphics. Thank you again for joining us for episode 62 of Well Met. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Well Met is a production of BlizzPro.com. The show records live at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at twitch.tv/BlizzPro. To get the latest news and information about the show, follow us on Twitter at Well Met Podcast, or join us on our subreddit at reddit.com/r/WellMetPodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can find out how at patreon.com/WellMetPodcast.
Oh God.